As you know, it would be in Ukraine's best interest to join NATO. Would be in the best interest of Ukraine to join NATO as well as the European Union because at least in theory, when you if you're in NATO, it works as a very good deterrent for countries like Russia not to invade you, right? Poland's in NATO, and Poland feels pretty confident that it's not going to be invaded, even though it's starting to change a bit. Poland is starting to get a little bit worried that, like, Russia is going to ignore Poland's NATO status, and that the West is also going to ignore NATO's Poland's NATO status. But that's sort of besides the point. Technically speaking, if you're in NATO, that provides you a level of safety from being invaded by countries like Russia. So we know that there are a couple of countries that sort of are a little bit against, that voice being for now against Ukraine joining NATO. Among them, we have the US, Germany, and there are certain uh, things that Ukraine is expected to do in order to join NATO, just as Ukraine is expected to do certain things in order to um, join the European Union. And there's a special group that sort of is dedicated to working on meeting the conditions of joining the European Union. But no such group has existed for joining NATO, and that is about to change actually, as Ukraine is about to create such a group. Committee on NATO issues to be created in Parliament, Ukraine's Parliament head. Ruslan Stefanchuk, chairman of the Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's parliament, said that there are plans to set up a separate committee in the near to set up a separate committee in the near future to adapt national legislation to NATO standards. So Ukraine's base attitude is we're gonna do our best to sort of meet NATO standards, and we're gonna set up this special committee that will focus only on this task. And this committee is gonna make sure that Ukraine stays on course in order to meet all of the requirements that Ukraine needs to meet in order to be able to join NATO, which of course would be great because, as we've discussed before, NATO equals safety from invasions. Stefanchuk, in an interview with Interfax Ukraine, quote, as we are entering the eve of the Washington summit, I am initiating the creation of a committee on NATO. There was a proposal to set up a separate committee in the near future that would take over all the functions of bringing Ukrainian legislation in line with NATO standards. If we want to make progress in NATO, we must have people in the parliament who are in charge of this issue. Details. Stefanchuk emphasized that Ukraine has two important foreign policy vectors related to the European Union and NATO, but the European Union vector is the subject of a separate committee, so such a committee already exists for the European Union that sort of laser focuses on meeting the standards of the EU and making sure that Ukraine stays on course. While NATO, for some reason, does not have such parliamentary attention. So, yeah, there's going to be a special committee that is going to focus solely on meeting the necessary requirements for joining NATO.